All right, how's it going? We are going to let a few more people file in here as we get started. We're expecting about 35 to 40 people tonight, so excited about that. But this is our first webinar on the DPT application process. So just a couple of housekeeping items is that we really want it to be interactive. It's just me kind of rolling tonight. So use the Q&A, use the questions tab, and I'll do my best to kind of answer those as we go. If it's something that's really pertinent at the moment, then we'll try to answer it then and there. If it's something that's more of a broader question or something more specific to you personally, then I'll try to answer those at the end if possible. So let's kind of get rolling here. So a couple of housekeeping items. One thing we're always looking for is shadows that want to come in and experience what it's like to be in an outpatient physical therapy setting. So we would encourage you to reach out just to me. I've got my email there. I'm happy to answer those. I get requests usually year round. We also have some aid openings too. So if you have some inquiries there, we can do that. If you also have general questions about PT, about outpatient PT, about the DPT process, don't hesitate to use me as a resource. I try to do my best to keep up with the requests and the questions that people have. We will have another webinar that will be hosted by myself and Mark Bama, who is the owner in West Seattle. And we're going to kind of tackle kind of perfecting the essay and also rebuilding the GPA for those of you that can relate and fallen behind on that. One other quick item too is this month we are supporting Ukraine refugees. So join our team and kind of supporting the Red Cross and their efforts in Ukraine and Poland. You can go directly to our website there, or you can simply go to our homepage, click on the banner at the top, and it will take you to our page to donate. If you do not have money to donate, which many of you are students, I completely understand. There's ways that we can help donate on your behalf. So follow the cues and the directions there on that web page. So again, that's just on our homepage, the top of the banner there. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Ben, and I am the owner and founder of Lake Washington Physical Therapy. I myself worked as an aide, getting shadow and volunteer and paid hours back in 1991. So I was about 15, 16 at the time. So I've been in a clinic basically most of my life. I knew I wanted to be in a clinic and being a therapist, and that was something that was really inspiring to me. I, like many of you and many of our therapists, or almost all of our therapists, had a sports injury and found PT that way. Was really inspired by the therapist that I was working under at the time. So Ken Roll was who I was with, and I spent a couple of years there at the clinic he was owning and managing at the time. I graduated from Redmond High School in 1994. I went to Montana, like I mentioned, had another series of injuries, went there to play football and track, had injuries, and found myself in the training room and in local clinics. I've worked a number of jobs in those summers. You can see those there. And I think every job that you work outside of healthcare has a lot of pertinence and is really important in kind of shaping you as a PT. I graduated from UM in 1998. And that's a picture of the University of Montana right there that was on our cover. I was admitted to PT school after my undergraduate program was complete and entered the graduate program there. At the time, it was a master's. So when you see people have an MPT or an MSPT, those are people that have a master's before it transitioned to a doctorate. And it pretty much went to a doctorate, nationwide in about 2000, 2001. So when you see DPT, that's people have gone to a third year and have a doctorate. After I graduated PT school, I went and worked at Health South, and Health South was the largest PT clinic chain in the country at the time. And we were the Mariners home clinic, so we had a chance to work with the Mariners, which was really great. It was a fast-paced clinic, not a lot of one-on-one time. Started my own clinic with my old clinical instructor and my old CI, Ken Crinklaw at Redmond PT in 2002, and then sold that to him and opened Lake Washington PT in 2010. I'm also a race director. I've started an app called Run Cadence that you can find. It's free on the App Store. It manages cadence. We opened a number of other clinics there too, with former aides and students that you can see kind of listed there. So what we wanted to kind of do with the DPT University kind of platform, and that was what someone one of my friends called. He's like, you guys have got a lot of people into school. We're 104 people into graduate school since we opened in 2010. And so they said, you're kind of like DPT University. And I said, well, thanks. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that in an upcoming presentation. One of the things that we're looking at here is kind of a broad audience. So tonight, the respondents, we have a lot of schools represented: Western, Washington State, UW, UPS, Eastern, University of Montana, Northern Arizona, Oregon, Gonzaga, and Oregon State University. And it's exciting to have that many people kind of respond and be a part of this and kind of start to look at that. If there's any questions, make sure to use the Q&A for me. I'll get that. I'll be notified if there's a question that you have. So and that's kind of the interactive. Most people are familiar with Zoom at this point. So the things I wanted to tackle tonight was to keep the information relatively formal information, but keep the process very informal. So make this more of a chat. And that's kind of why we went this webinar format versus doing it in person, just because we could reach more people. The four main areas I want to kind of touch on tonight, and everyone's going to have a different level of kind of depth that they've dove into when it comes to PT school. But in my opinion, and everything tonight is my opinions and my experiences that I've seen, and I do sit on the interview process at the University of Montana. My colleague Mark sits on the application review process at University of Washington. I was a student coordinator of this as well 20 plus years ago. And again, like I said, I read probably 10 essays per year and write a ton of letters of recommendation. So I feel like I'm pretty informed on this process. We also take about 7 to 8 DPT interns per year. So we're trying to stay on top of this process as best we can. But in my mind, there's four main areas, and they kind of are in this order of importance as well. And that's GPA, experience, essays, and GRE. And so what I want to do is kind of go through each of these component parts as best we can and kind of take a look at and kind of peel them back. And if need be, maybe these are individual webinars themselves, but I think this will give us kind of a little bit of an overview tonight. So the GPA, okay, the question that we most commonly get is, what do I need to have for my GPA? Well, I think the simplest way is to kind of break that down into two parts. There's the prerequisite GPA. And again, the prerequisite GPA is going to be the coursework that are requirements for the university that you're applying to. So they're going to be relatively similar. There's going to be a few oddities: comparative anatomy, microbiome. There's a couple of outliers that some schools require and others don't. But I would say overall, they've become fairly uniform over the last 5 years. Your prerequisite GPA is more important in the application process than your overall GPA. So what I've seen over the last few years, and and I would encourage you to meet and talk to counselors at PT programs around the country that you're interested in. But what I've seen is most applicants that have at least a 3.2 are going to be, that's what's going to be required just to kind of get a good look at you. I find if you have a 3.5 to a 3.7 and you're at a school that does interviews, you'll likely get one. And that's assuming that the rest of your application is pretty well put together. If you have a 3.8 to 4.0, I think you're pretty much going to get statistically going to get an offer from somewhere, depending on how big a net you cast. Meaning, if you send your PTCAS, which is the clearinghouse for your application, if you send it to 8 to 10 schools, you're going to probably get into a school. Pretty certain. I would definitely bet money on that. The 3.5 to 3.7 group is something that you have to, I think, have a little bit more perfection and polished application. The second tier is your overall GPA. So this is, again, kind of second in the hierarchy in my mind and from every professor and every department I've ever talked to. And that is that they want to see that there's obviously a core level of competence in your overall curriculum compared to your in the cohort, but it's not as critical because, if you don't get an A in intro to business or geology, it's not really going to affect what they feel is your capacity as a PT student. I think typically if you can keep that in that 3.3 to 3.5 for your overall GPA or greater, you're in a good spot. I think 3.6, 3.7 looks really strong. So pretty similar guidelines to the prerequisite. But again, if you had to put your time and effort in a class this semester, this quarter, and you had the chance to look at organic chemistry or, an English lit class that has no bearing on this application, you definitely want to spend your time on that chemistry class so you're not later retaking that class. Anecdotally, I would say that Dr. Chuck Leonard, who I worked with and did a thesis with and a number of research projects, he told me that he'd always take a 3.8 versus a 4.0. And I thought that was always kind of an interesting comment, but I have kind of learned to kind of agree with that as well. And he said that if someone has a 4.0, and this isn't always the case, but in his mind, when someone has a 4.0, it means they really have not challenged themselves outside of their comfort zone. The career in general is going to be something where you're out of your comfort zone daily. It could be you're trying to relate to a certain person. It could be trying to understand an injury that you haven't seen before. It could be a surgical technique that comes from out of state that you're not familiar with the surgeon. It could be a number of different things in our job. And I think if you've never really kind of pushed yourself to have a chance for failure, I think that's kind of a mistake. So I think taking coursework or studying abroad or doing anything that could challenge you is a really smart thing. We have a quick question here. Let's see. This quick question is from Satali. It says, does it matter if you've retaken a class? Could this be seen negatively? Typically depends on the school, but typically when you fill out the PTCAS on the GPA, it's usually a pure replacement, meaning that if you took Bio 101 and it was your freshman year and you didn't really know how to study yet, it was university life was challenging, and especially right now with the times of COVID, and so many of you have kind of dealt with that over the last couple of years, is that if you took it and replaced it, it would be a straight across replacement. So it would still be on your transcript, but I think if anything, it would be a positive. It would show that you'd retaken it and that you'd taken extra effort and it mattered to replace that. That being said, if you have a chance to replace it with a higher level class, so say you had a biology 101, you had an opportunity to take a biology 200 class that would satisfy it, then you would just use the higher level class, and that would actually look better on the application if that was possible. So great question though. And one of the things that I like to do with our aides is we sit down usually really early in the process when they come on, and even our shadows as well. And we'll kind of look at the transcript and just say, okay, what's going on here? Okay, you've got a 3.3, you've got a 3.2, something of that nature. How do we get you to a 3.5? How do we get 3.6? Okay, is there a class that you took a C in or a B minus that was, that you're now a better student that you could easily replace? And there's usually 2 or 3 of those. And I've seen people that we've worked with over the years that were, with this working as aides for a year or 2, and they've gone from a 3.1 to a 3.8. So it's pretty impressive. It does take a lot of effort, but if you can replace a class where there was just a bit of a failure, due to any number of circumstances, and it can repair really quickly. I always compare it a little bit to a batter early in the season in baseball, and if you have a poor kind of batting average to start off the season's not scrapped, but you do have to kind of have some pretty solid at bats after that. If there's any other questions on that, then let me know. Again, the GPA, as I mentioned before, is kind of the top tier requirement. So this is usually one of the quick eliminations for some applications. And it basically is important just to make it onto the second phase. So a lot of the schools, they'll basically take all the GPAs and they'll basically put them into piles, and the higher GPAs will kind of start off in a little bit of an advantage on the overall process of evaluating them. Got another quick question here from an anonymous attendee. If we did not perform well in general chemistry, but perform well in organic chemistry, will they take that into account, or do they look at general chem? It depends on how the school is requesting the series. So it could be a chemistry 121 or 122 or something of that nature. They want both of those to be solid along with the lab for most of the schools. So if you decided to take an upper level chemistry beyond that, you could likely replace portions of the chemistry. But I would probably, for the real core classes are going to be physics, chemistry, anatomy, and physiology. And so those are the ones that are really going to look at really strongly. So I think you really want to do your best to get a B+ to an A minus in those, as those would be the first thing that they kind of look at. We got a question here from Lucy, and said, in terms of retaking classes, would retaking the class at a community college be seen as somewhat inadequate? I would say historically, yes, but not over the last 5 years. I think with more people working and the cost of school going up, and now, of course, with COVID, people's transcripts are like a game of Tetris. There's people that have been to 3 or 4 universities over the last 3 years, just because of what was open, what was in person, what wasn't. So I don't think it does. And I think if you're doing it something, especially postgraduate, I think it shows an extra level of effort. And I think that's something you'd want to explain in either portions of your essay or in the interview process. Alex Johnson says, why chemistry and not biology? I'm not sure what that means, if it means to major in it or why are they not considering biology as important. I think anatomy and physiology is kind of their main concern. I think the rigors for most programs around the country, chemistry is going to be more difficult than a general biology. The microbiology, which is required, would be kind of in the same league as the chemistry for most universities. So microbiology, an A in microbiology would be a really solid mark on your transcript and on your application. Question from Noah, before applying to PT school, will you need to have completed both anatomy and physiology courses? If it's a series of a year-long's worth of courses, yes, you would need to complete at least a portion of it. You can have what they call an active class occurring, where you would be allowed to, say if you had anatomy and physiology 110 and the second series was 111, you would need to have 110 done, and you could say that I'm going to be taking 111 at the time of your application submission. That goes for retakes as well. Davey wrote, with the pandemic, I know most schools allowed you the option to choose a pass instead of putting your actual letter grade on your transcript. Would having this look bad? I don't think it would have looked bad if you were applying this year. I think next year, just my hunch and from my conversations with professors is that they're going to expect people to have their prerequisites completed, as done historically. We'll go into a little bit of the volunteer hours and the shadowing, that sort of thing too, but I think they're going to kind of start to try to pivot back to the normal application process, which I mean, like your physics, your chemistry, anatomy, physiology, you're going to want to have those as an actual letter grade. But that's a good question. And I think each school will differ a little bit on that. And again, the GPA is a big nut to crack, but that's really the biggest thing is I think sitting down and looking at your transcript and seeing what, if you were evaluating yourself critically, what would leave you questions in that application process. A question from Alex. I'm seeing a lot of issues because of all the applications start in the fall. So I have about a year's worth of classes in progress or to be started. Will this be a big issue? They'll usually let you have a class or 2 that's in progress. If you have, say, 4 of the prereqs, unless you have an outstanding overall GPA, and maybe you can have some form of conversation with that university of like why they're all coming down to the wire, then you might be a better applicant the following year. But I would always apply if you can. If you feel like you have the coursework relatively done, I would always try to apply, because a second application usually gets a better look too. Next on that list, we're kind of talking about experience. So we can do some more GPA questions at the end if we'd like. But experience and kind of what are they looking for? So this was changed a little bit with COVID, and that was, they went from having a minimum hour requirement of between 50 and 80 per school to some schools eliminating the requirement completely. That will be coming back this year. And I think most universities uniformly will be at least 50 hours. I will say, just from my recent interviews that I did at Montana, there was a lot of people that had no experience at all, and it didn't reflect real well on their interview or on their application as a whole. So I would just historically speaking, I think you want to have anywhere from 500 to 2,000 hours. And that sounds like, whoa, that's a lot of hours. Well, if you work part-time for a year at a clinic, that's going to be probably about 500 to 1,000 hours. If you worked full-time or full-time through the summers, you could probably get towards that 2,000 hour mark. It's going to really set you apart when we're talking about what will make you stand out versus what just gets the job done to get to apply. When you have a larger number of hours, your chances for a better letter recommendation from a PT improve. I think just your awareness and your knowledge of the industry and the field is much superior than your colleagues and your cohort that you'll be applying with. Just anecdotally, when we did these interviews in the spring, excuse me, in the fall for Montana, and that was my role this year, is that there were some that had just amazing experiences and they were able to really get that across in the interview. And there's some that I don't think really knew much about physical therapy. And that kind of came across in this interview process too. And I think what it sounds like, just from talking to people in these departments across the country, is that they're probably going to stick primarily with Zoom interviews because it's so efficient, it's so cost effective, and it's so quick. So I think, the interview process and being able to come across and have some knowledge of the field is going to be really important. I know in our clinics, what we like to do is to do some mock interviews with our aides before they head off for the interview process. And that's always been really helpful because the knowledge that you have when working in a clinic is going to be really superior to someone who's just kind of shadowed or kind of stood against the wall while a PT was working. You're going to have access to knowing what, how Medicare works, how deductibles work, how how to deal with patients, the customer service aspect, and you'll have usually some anecdotal stories that you can share of like your favorite patients and things like that during the interview process. So we have a couple of questions on this as well. Anonymous attendee, how important is it to get different settings of experience? And that is an excellent question. I was actually getting to that. It was in my notes. So historically, I'm going to speak from historical trends on this. Is you want to try to get yourself into as many settings as possible, but you do want to have one core areas. Meaning, like for a lot of our aides over the years, they might have 1,000 to 2,000 hours in the clinic with us, but I usually encourage them. The schools are going to love it if they see you have some experience in neuro, experience in pediatrics, maybe experience in the schools, experience in geriatrics or skilled nursing facilities, maybe even some time with an OT. Those are things that really, really round out the application, and just it shows the committees at each respective university that you've gone the extra mile and that you are aware of all the different fields that are possible there. I will say when you get to that interview process, which might be another webinar, but what they don't want to see is a prospective PT student coming in that is not open to other fields or other niches in the industry. So they want to see that you're willing to go into skilled nursing, you're willing to go into the VA, you're not just trying to go to sports medicine, orthopedics, or you're not just going into neuro. They want you to have a really open mind to the experiences as a whole. Question from Alex, would 100 hours at 3 or 4 different clinics be better or worse than 500 and 1,000 at 1 or 2? I kind of answered that. I think if I had my choice, I'd probably do 500 at 1, and then so say you had a bucket of 1,000 hours, I'd probably do 500 to 600 at 1, and then do 50 at 3 or 4 others, just to try to get just more experience. And then a question from Noah, if you work as a reception desk attendant or at a physical therapy that satisfy hours we need, or we need to be working directly with supervision, you don't have to be under the direct supervision of the PT. You just need to be in a PT facility with a licensed physical therapy on site. So working as a receptionist, a desk attendant, totally great. In fact, you're going to know probably more than the person that's cleaning tables and doing modalities or that sort of thing. You're going to have really understand when they ask you questions in your interview process about PT limitations, PT authorizations, all those things. You'll have a really strong working understanding of that, and probably know more than actually the professor that's asking the questions, because they'll typically have been out of the practice setting for a while. Question from Lucy, there are some PT schools that require you to get experience in another non-PT healthcare setting. In your experience, how important is that in the application process? I haven't heard of that, so I would say it's not very important in my mind. But I think if the choice is to, work, work as a barista at Starbucks or work as a medical assistant or a CNA, I would definitely go with the medical experience for sure. If if all things are equal and it works in your schedule. Um, there's another question here. Hold on just a second. What setting should I get my experience in? That's a pretty general question. So it probably depends on where you see yourself wanting to practice later. So if pediatrics is your passion, I would try to get my experience in pediatrics, just because you'll have a better working understanding if that's really what you want to do for a career. Because this is, let's be honest, this is a big investment of all of your time. It's a big investment of money, and it's you're kind of setting the course for the rest of your career. How many settings should I try to accumulate hours in? I think, like we talked about that, I think you want to have at least one core one, and then have like two to three other ones that you could do maybe while you're working at your main one. Can my reference be someone I shadowed under? Absolutely, absolutely. That would be, I think, one of the major goals of doing the shadowing or working as an aide, is it to have a PT, whatever setting it may be the person that writes the letters for you, because that will give a lot of credibility to the hours and everything that you did there. And what is the perfect amount of hours? I don't think there's a right answer on that. I will say, when we were interviewing people this last go around, is there were some people that had no hours, and there was some that had worked as an aide for 2 years, so they had 4,000 hours. They're definitely, in my mind, they were ready to go. They knew all the material and all the questions that you could ask them. They had good answers for and had good relevant experiences, and they could kind of anecdotally point to different situations that they had been into. So those are all good questions too. A question from Noah: could more volunteer experience make up for a less competitive GPA? Yes, it can. So I think if you were someone who has if there's two people with a 3.5 and someone has 2,000 hours and someone has 50 hours, I think the school is going to, all things being equal on like the essay, I think they're going to definitely lean to the person with more experience, because it's their big concern is one, and this is one of the reasons the GPA is important, is they want to make sure people aren't going to fail out of the program. They want to make sure people get through the program, complete the program, and pass their boards. That's kind of one of the overarching concerns, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, it's reputational for the university. They want to make sure they're putting out a good product of individuals in the professional community. But also, if they have a spot that goes empty for a year and a half, 2 years, the university loses a lot of money, and the programs can't afford to have people that are not there. So if you've done, to go back to Noah's question, so if you've done 2,000 hours of volunteer work or paid work, you're going to be pretty darn sure that that's what you want to do. If you did 50 hours, like the two people that left my program when I was in school were people that had 4.0s and only did 50 hours of volunteer work. So they weren't sure they wanted to do PT. They just kind of just applied because they didn't know what they're going to do after undergrad. So it was kind of more of a panic application than like a passion application. So that's always favorable for the university to look at someone who has a lot of hours and really knows what they want to do. Question from Alex: outside of the general struggle getting into any clinics, having trouble finding hospitals, acute care, etc., to email, is there a good way to find these? It's difficult with acute care to email someone, because they just get inundated with email and messages all day. So I would say probably, you might want to even just go old school and have a resume printed out, have put it in an envelope, actually go to the hospital, see if you can kind of get a contact there somewhere, take a good look at their webpage, see if there's someone that you can ask for to drop the letter off to. It would really stand out. I know myself, I get about 350 emails a day from different things. And when I get an actual letter, it's like, wow, okay, that's really different. I'm not saying don't email me. I'm just saying it really stands out. It used to be the reverse, where you get all these resumes dropped off on your desk in paper and you would occasionally get an electronic one. Now it's completely reversed. So I think I would kind of go that route and just try to see if you can kind of get past the firewall of the front desk. I know it's a little more difficult with COVID, but I think you should be able to, work the angles there. And maybe there's even like a front office email you can get and see if there's someone you can connect with there, and then drop it off in person or stop by in person, or, in that sort of situation. And you maybe just take whatever you can find. You kind of, the outpatient's going to be probably the easier one. Acute care settings are going to be tougher. Skilled nursing, if you have all your vaccinations, they're usually welcoming to have extra help. So that could be kind of a way to kind of work that. Nancy, who I know, what if you keep being denied from inpatient PT and other facilities like neuro, pediatrics, etc.? What advice do you have? If you want to get pediatric work too, it's not through like a children's hospital or something like that, then you could also look at the school district. The school districts are around the country, at least around here locally, and we've been more conservative on our COVID kind of awareness for the schools here than most of the country, but you should be able to get into the school and work with the PT, OT in that setting. And all they ask is that you have your vaccinations, and there may be some masking requirements depending on where you're at. But that's a way that a lot of our aides over the years have gotten pediatric experience. To get something at children's is a really, or something similar to children's, is really, really long process. It's similar to Harborview. So Harborview, kind of the number one, level 1 trauma facility here in Seattle. I did hours there, but I was doing hours, I guess I was about 17, 18, and I waited almost 7 months to get 20 hours there. So it's quite a process. But I think if I would talk to the PTs that you do know and see if they can, send a message to someone, say, hey, I've got this person that I think would be great to come in and do some shadowing for you. They're getting them ready for their PT application. So I wouldn't hesitate to reach out to the PTs family and friends that that have connections to these facilities. A question from Richard: in terms of letters of recommendation, is it better to intern/shadow at one clinic and work as an aide at another clinic setting, or would it be better to work and shadow at one setting? I think if the shadowing gets you the paid job, I would do the shadowing at the same clinic. But I think if you can have two different settings, it just rounds out your application a little bit better. So I think, for example, like if you could shadow at a skilled nursing facility and work in an orthopedic clinic and get paid for that, then that's always preferable. And paid work is not looked at any differently than volunteer work in this situation. So you definitely want to get paid. I think the wage scale for aides in general is more of like an externship. So it's not, you're not going to be like living luxuriously on an aide salary, but at the same time, you're really doing it for the experience and to get the letters recommendation and to make that next step into the program. So good question though. I want to jump a little bit into the essays. Oops, I've got one last question here. Question from Raymond, going back to experience. Would experience like being a personal trainer, group fitness trainer be beneficial? Absolutely. So this would show that you have the ability to kind of organize and public speak to a group. We had 2 people that we interviewed this year and we gave offers to that had been personal trainers that were really charismatic and you could tell had a really organized class schedule. You'd want to basically keep track of what you were doing, how many people you're training, what's the size of the group, the type of classes you're teaching, what are the ages and the demographics of who you do teach, and you would want to speak to that in your essays as well as in your interviews, because that'll make a big difference, especially if you have anybody that has disabilities. That's a huge selling factor. I will say on that same note, if you can apply for school, and this isn't going to take you way off course financially or time-wise, and you can do this, is the CSCS or the ACSM would be nice things to have on the application. They're not need-to-haves by any means, they're nice-to-haves. And that's something to kind of look at if you have the time and the money to do it. A question from Noah: what's a good amount of hours to be working during the week while doing school? That's going to really depend on your ability to kind of organize your time and your time management in general. I would say for myself, when I was in school, and this was a long time ago, is that I would do about 10 hours a week. 10 to 15 hours a week. And then in the summer, I would do more time at the hospital. So I worked at an outpatient clinic in Missoula during the school year. And then in the summer, I worked at either Evergreen or Overlake and did hours there, both paid and unpaid. And so in the summer, I would try to get 50 hours a week. That's just kind of who I was and am. But during the school year, your academics are the absolute most important from the standpoint of, you just can't you can't afford to have a class that you don't get at least a B plus in. So whatever that working schedule is, and if it's maybe it's a semester or a quarter where you have more generals that aren't as going to be as, punitive to your prerequisite GPA, or not at all, then that maybe you pick up more hours in those quarters, and that might be the way you kind of adjust the cadence of what your school looks like. How early is it to reach out to places for summer interning jobs? I would reach out now, to be honest. I know we're hiring. We're also getting shadow requests. What you're going to find is that most clinics that didn't allow shadows last year because of COVID, and this is pretty much across the country, but specifically here in Seattle, is this year they are taking them, but they're taking like one at a time. And that's how our clinics are running. That's how a lot of my friends' clinics are running, meaning that during the course of a 12-hour day, from, say you're open from 6 to 7 or 6 to 6 or something of that nature, that they're only allowing one shadow at a time. So if you're someone who can get 6 of the hours, then there's only 6 hours free. So I would do that requesting soon. And I know for the way we work things at our facilities is that we give priority to seniors over juniors and juniors over sophomores, and so on and so forth, kind of down the line, because they're going to be in more of a immediate need of the hours than someone who's a freshman or a sophomore. But I will say the people that reach out early will get the hours first, and they'll get the times that they want. So if you're just purely shadowing and you need to work an additional job, it's not nice to lock in those hours early of knowing when your paid work job is going to be, and then when the shadow hours would be. But that's a good question. So I would reach out early, and I would say, generally speaking, you're going to need to reach out a couple of times. So you may, lob an email into a general inquiry at a clinic, wherever you may be. I know a lot of people on this call were in Pullman and in Bellingham. If you're reaching out to, say, Bellingham PT, you're going to send out an email initially. I think I would follow up on that email about 5 to 7 days later and say, oh, if you haven't heard a response. So I would say, hey, I sent an email about 5 or 7 days later. Again, wouldn't hurt to drop off like a paper letter at that point too. I know that's really antiquated, but it does make you stand out for sure. And you also have to think about the person that's receiving the letter. Many times is probably going to be mid 30s to mid 50s. So for them to receive something like that will be, I think, something welcomed and familiar. As far as essays, so this is kind of the next phase. So hopefully everyone, I know it seems daunting, but it's not as bad as it seems. Like once you kind of get into it and you start knocking these things off and kind of checking off the list. I know that our aides historically are always like really relieved when they get completed with the essay, because that's such a big part. The essay is a really important component of this. They all are, but I think the overarching thing is you have to be able to, you must tell your story. So, and what does that mean? Well, there's so many people that are just, I like to help people. I got injured playing sports. I want to be in sports medicine, orthopedics. That's like 75% of the applications you'll read. So what you need to tell is the story. I was in the Peace Corps. I grew up in Australia and moved to Slovakia, and then all the story that your family has and how you got to where you're at. And some people have a more dramatic story than others, but a lot of it's how you tell it. And I'm not saying that you need to embellish it. You just need to tell it in a way that's interesting. So if all that you did is you hurt your ankle and you got into PT and you lifeguarded in the summer and there was really no adversity, I think there probably is more adversity than what people give themselves credit to. Did you pay for your own school? Did you struggle with grades originally? Did you have a learning disability? There's going to be, everyone's got kind of a little hardship or a barrier that they might not think of. And I think that's something you have to kind of tease out. So when you have people looking into application with you. Hopefully you have someone that can kind of help review it for you and kind of check your blind spots. Is that, is there things that you're missing in your own story that you shouldn't and that you need to tell in? This year we had one of the strongest stories we've ever had, and that was a gentleman by the name of Maru, who's in his mid to late 30s, decided he was going to go back to PT. And this is kind of the extreme example of just a story, but he was a military veteran, served in Iraq, came back on the GI Bill, went and got his degree in accounting, worked at a huge accounting firm, got his master's in accounting, sat in front of a computer all day and decided he didn't like doing that, got into bodybuilding and cheerleading and modeling, and decided he wanted to do stuff with his body, helping people, and went all the way back and left a really high paying job and came and worked as an aide and got into the University of Colorado. But just his story and kind of the whole arc of it is amazing. So think about your story, and also, maybe getting involved in things that you're not involved in now. So it could be something with the Special Olympics. It could be other avenues, and just getting contacts and meeting people and showing interest in anything that's related to kind of fitness, health, disabilities. Those are all great things to kind of not only just endear you to the application committee, but also kind of really start to make you realize, is this something I really want to do? When it comes to the essay components, and these are kind of things I kind of laid out there, this is always shocking to me, but so many people can't write an essay in the kind of a proper paragraph kind of structured format. So you really want to have that intro and have it be interesting, have the body of it that kind of comes off of the intro, and then a conclusion that kind of wraps it all up. So it shouldn't be like you're reading someone's resume. It should be that there's substance to it, but it also has grammatical flow to it. So this is something that's, most of the essays I've read over the years are kind of missing that. So again, this is a good thing if you have a good English teacher, to have them review yours and just say, was it interesting? Did I get across what I want to get across? And I would probably, historically speaking, kind of have 3 things that you talk about. So it could be, something in adversity, maybe something with academics, and maybe something volunteer or in the community that you've been involved with. Grammar is surprisingly not always great on these. So grammar would be important. Again, the content, which we kind of mentioned, and then kind of flows into the same thing with telling your story, but is it interesting? So I would say, if you're a professor and you read these, you might be reading, when I was on the student committee at Montana, we would read, I don't know, like 40 or 50 of these over the course of a week, and like they just start to blend together. So how can you make yours a little more interesting? I think some self-deprecation is kind of welcomed, and less generic speaking is kind of welcomed as well. Any questions on the essays? Okay, question from Richard. Is the length of the essay specified by PTCAS or by the DPT school that you're applying to? That, I believe, is going to be school dependent. Again, I haven't been into the PTCAS. I just hear about it. Some schools will have a supplemental essay as well. And there's almost always an essay that you do when you're either at the interviews or virtually on the day of the interviews for most of the schools. So that could be something like, why are you interested in healthcare? Or what are the changes you see in PT? Or what are the professional challenges a PT sees each day? Those are kind of the essay questions that they might have you do. So it's something they want to see grammar. They want to see if you actually know what the job is about. And then if you know like the current going on of the field as well, like what are the hurdles and the headwinds that the field is seeing. A question from Alex: how mind-numbing is it going to be doing 10 plus slightly different applications? Well, it's as mind-numbing as you want it to be. Like I wouldn't do them all at once, but this is so easy compared to where it was when I applied. So when I applied, none of this was computerized. So you actually did 10 distinctly different applications, and there was a $300 fee per application. Now it's through PTCAS. It's $50, I think, this year per school, and you basically click a button and it goes to all the different schools. So There are a small number of things that are required that might be a little bit different for a couple of schools, but for the most part, you can basically do one really solid application and you can pick 8 schools to send it to. It's the easiest it's ever been this past 2 or 3 years for sure. Anonymous attendee, would overcoming adversity such as addiction be appropriate to talk about in the essay? How about in terms of family addiction and how that impacted you? I think that would be very powerful. So it depends if it's your addiction. I think I would want to make sure you'd want to make sure to kind of reiterate the soberness or the steps you've taken and the path and how clean you are and clear-minded you are at this point. If it's a family addiction thing, that's a great story to tell about. It's very timely. It's also a major hurdle, and it shows that you've really worked hard to get to where you're at this point. I mean, if you have a family addiction issue where there's been instability in the household and you're getting to the point where you're applying for a doctorate in PT and you've got a GPA that, kind of reflects that, that's an amazing accomplishment in itself. So that's the kind of stuff you want to talk about. I think you don't want to like be melodramatic about it, even though there is a lot of drama there. I think you want to be lead the reader to understand the intensity of it, but also kind of the optimism that you have now as you've kind of working your way past that, or your family's working its way past that. Question from Satali: why is getting to know applicants at such a personal level so important? What does that tell you? What does that tell you as an interviewer? I think what the schools are being really selective because this is going to be a really tight knit group of people, and if you haven't spent time with the PT department or DPT students, you should. Is that this will be your 35 to 50 closest friends for 3 straight years. So they want to kind of almost like a sports team. They want to collect a group that's going to have a culture and personalities that kind of complement each other. They're not looking for the same person. They're actually looking for lots of different people that would kind of fill the different roles. There might be someone who's more alpha, someone who's more introverted but really brilliant. They're kind of looking for that sort of thing. So they want to know personal level. They want to get to know you because these spots are very coveted. So they don't want to just give one to anybody who has a high GPA. They want to give it to people that they think are going to be successful in the program and actually bring a lot of positivity to the program. Like they're going to make the program better. And I think that was the people that in our interviews that I did this year, we targeted of the 10 or 11 people that we interviewed. There were 3 that were just really, really, really solid. That would be great in any program around the country. And there was 3 that would be okay. And there was 4 that wouldn't be good candidates, in my opinion. They just didn't have enough experience and they didn't seem to really know much about PT. Question from Noah: can we talk if we're having difficulty using PTCS, or who can we talk to? They have a really good help desk there. And if you know anyone that is applied to PT school, those would be good people to reach out to. Depending on what school you're at, there's a DPT program at UPS and at UW, Montana Eastern. So if you have any of your friends that have gotten in, or even reaching out to the department chairs there, that's a good way to kind of get connected with that. Anonymous: similar to the last question about type of adversity, would discussing surviving sexual assault and how you overcame it be an appropriate topic? Yeah, I wouldn't probably go into graphic detail or call out specific individuals as far as your case or the assault, but I would definitely talk about it. It's a very important issue to bring about conversation, and also to let the professors and the application committee know kind of what you've persevered through, and now you're where you're at, which is quite an accomplishment in itself. So yeah, I would bring it up, but I would just be, make sure you have people review that you feel comfortable with, review what the application looks like. Question: typically, how long is the average essay? What length essay might be too long for a viewer to read through? They're going to have a word count for you. So it's going to be, I believe, 600 to 1,000 words or something like that per topic. So I would just follow the guidelines there and, take it close to the edge of whatever the number that they allot you. A question from Bren. Do some university programs allow you to shadow their program for a day or two? As far as once you're an applicant there, they might. I think at Montana, where I went, they would allow students to come in and shadow classroom activity for like the group lectures. I don't think they do for the smaller breakout classes, but that would be a great way to kind of get a feel for the university program, wherever that may be. But I would just contact the chair of the department directly, and I would probably CC them on an email with the office coordinator or the person that's going to basically be the secretary to the chair of the department. So that way you have two people on the catch there, and it might help your odds of getting an answer whether you can do that. How does one overcome the barrier of student loans and paying for housing during PT school? Is it realistic to preparing us for our future? What's the max amount of loans one should take out? Ooh, that is a deep question. There's been a lot of discussion about this at CMS and at CSM and all the different groups that are kind of looking at the cost of school. And that's not just PT school, that's every type of program at this point. How do you overcome the barrier of student loans? Well, I think the easy answer is you have to sacrifice a little bit if you're on the speed at which you want to pay them off. I mean, you can consolidate the loans afterwards, and your undergraduate loans do suspend, depending on the type of loan they are, while you're in graduate school. Is it realistic preparing us for our future? I'm not sure what that means, but the program will definitely prepare you for doing the job, which is key. I think maybe you're speaking to, does the economics of the PT salary match the cost and the ROI, what the money you're putting in, will you get it back on the backside? I mean, it's not going to pay you like you're going to make in IT or computer science, but you're probably going to be doing something that you love to do. And I will say anecdotally, my friends that are in finance and tech, they would love to be PTs because our job is super fun, and you're helping people, and it's very, very intrinsically rewarding. Could it be more economically rewarding? Yeah, it could be at times, but I think, you're making a sacrifice to do something you really like. I think, as far as the amount of loans should you take out, you're gonna have to take out as much as it takes to get through school. So, going in-state is always going to be cheaper. If you can live at home, that's going to obviously cut down some costs there too. You want to be careful if you're taking out additional private loans, because those are going to be higher interest rates. And you will be able to deduct a small portion of the student loan interest upon graduation, but it's not a super large amount. You're talking about a $2,500 to $3,000 deduction, depending on your income level. But your starting salary for a PT is going to be anywhere from 65 to 75. So, and why is it not higher? Well, the PT is going to be reimbursed by insurance, and so you're at the mercy of what the insurance contracts are. So that's kind of a whole longer discussion. But if you saw higher reimbursement from the insurance companies, you'd see higher salaries in PT for sure. I think if you're kind of looking at that and you wanted to try to do a spreadsheet, you could also look at physical therapy assistant program, and you could say, well, with how much loans I'll have to take out and how long I want to do this job, you're going to need to do the PT job for quite a few years to make it worthwhile. If you're someone who might not do it super long, then I would probably do more of a physical therapy assistant program, which is remarkably cheaper. You're looking at about $30,000 versus, $150 to $250 for PT school. You add interest over time. The PTA program you could probably pay for while even possibly working. So it might be something to look at too if economics is really tight there. It's another thing you can think about is if you do get a PTA, then physical therapy assistant certification, is that you could later do a transitional DPT. So that's something that's going to be more a little easier and fiscally a little cheaper as well. Would it be a good idea to apply to schools out of state despite the higher costs? Yes, absolutely. You need to apply and get in somewhere. So that's kind of the first key. So I think you don't want to be paralyzed by the costs from the standpoint of it's going to cost you not to be working as a PT. So meaning that if you have a year, like if you could get into, say, if I'm living in Seattle and I can get into a school in Texas, and that's the only place I get in, it's still going to be more, it's going to be smarter economically for me to get into the Texas school, go to school, come out and start working as a PT versus taking a job, bartending or working as a PT aide for another 2 years, waiting for an in-state situation. Hopefully that makes sense. There's opportunity costs that are lost there, because your 401k, everything that you're going to be kind of developing once you're out as a PT is you're going to be, your whole life's going to kind of be on economic kind of hold while you're waiting to get into the program. So I would definitely apply out of state for sure. And some states are actually cheaper to live. Like, UW would be cheaper in state here for most of us, but the cost of living here is a lot higher. So you might, if there was a school in, in the Midwest or something that was cheaper, might be worth doing. Does being a PTA have any requirements? Yeah, you have to go to an accredited PTA program. It's about 1.5 years, and again, it will cost anywhere from about $20,000 to $40,000. Then you have to sit for your licensure with the state, and then you are a certified PTA. And we can kind of go into more detail, but you can probably read online too. But what a PTA is there a physical therapy assistant that can treat patients independently or in conjunction with a team of therapists. They have to have a physical therapist that oversees their treatment. That doesn't mean they have to be right next to them. It just means they need to be available. And we have PTAs, at least one PTA at each of our clinics, and they do a fantastic job. They're really critical part of the team, and they're also important from the standpoint of they work with every therapist patient. So what you'll usually see happen is that for a therapist like myself, I can't get my patients in twice a week or sometimes even once a week. So I'll work with my PTA, Manny, and she can see them once a week for me. And maybe between the two of us, they can get in 1 to 2 times a week. And she really helps kind of bridge that gap. She does her own charting. She does her own billing. And we huddle on patients usually a couple times a week, and it's a really great gig. I'm going to move on from essays real quick. So this is another exciting. So this is the least important. So as you're kind of fading, this is the least important. The GRE, what is it? So the graduate record exam, it basically brings in 3 major components: the verbal, quantitative, and the writing. And so what's the purpose of the GRE? Why is this required for PT school? Is what most of our aides always ask. Like, this is so silly. Why do I have to do this? Just like the MCAT or the LSAT, this is what PT schools use, and I believe OT uses it as well, and a couple other graduate programs. But they want to just basically see a baseline of intelligence. One, can you study for the exam? What are your verbal and kind of some of the math components as well? Like what are the basics that you can kind of get done under a time setting? So many of the PT school tests are very exhaustive and very challenging, that they want to see what you can do. They're not really looking for a super high score here. They want to make sure that you have a baseline, and make sure you didn't sneak through with like an easy school to get your GPA, that sort of thing. So it's a necessary evil. They're used almost by most schools' admissions committees. So this is the kind of the latest information I was given from the universities I talked to, what they're kind of shooting for. So kind of like a GPA, the GRE provides kind of a quantifiable measure of a PT's kind of abilities. So it also offers the additional benefit of comparing applications from completely different universities, regardless of where they went to college and they attended. It kind of levels the playing field for all applicants to a degree. So I'm not a great, test taker in that kind of standardized testing way, but this test was a tough test. Like this was next to like the OCS and the PT licensure exam. This was a tough test for sure. They do put this as a 4th tier thing. So really they just want to see if you get like a base level score, and then they really want to look at the GPA and your experience. Here's a question too. In general, how long or often should one study prepare for this exam? You know, I don't know if you can really prepare for this exam from any of the material standpoints. Kind of in my experience, and I took it twice, and just because I tried to get a better score the second time, you know, I had a qualifying score both times, but it's a painful test. But I think you can really only study. What I did is on the second time I took it is study for the flow of the test and how it's organized. The material is going to be like every crazy vocabulary word you've ever heard of. It's going to be strange math equations, like the craziest word problems you've ever heard. It's going to go back all the way to geometry, which I myself hadn't done since like ninth grade. And it's going to bring a lot of that stuff into play. It wants to see, are you generally smart, I guess, is there a baseline of smarts that they can expect to see from you? Like I mentioned too, that just that there's, if you went to Yale or you went to, Whatcom Community College, they want to see, make it kind of level and see, not being skewed by the name of the school, and let the GRE kind of be helpful in that regard. For how long do people usually study for this? I think people will study while they're on aid for a couple of weeks, maybe 2 to 4 weeks, and just try to get the gist. There's a lot of guides out there you can buy and that sort of thing, which probably are helpful. But I think just the more you read and the more you kind of have done well academically in school, you'll be probably pretty fine on it. The adequate scores, I don't have a number specifically this year, other than like what these were kind of laid out on this slide. I think each school is going to have kind of like a baseline. There's not a PTCAS baseline. There's like each school is going to kind of set their amount, but I don't think anyone really disqualifies you for the GRE. It's just one of the component pieces of the puzzle for them. Okay. I appreciate everybody coming. Is there any more questions on anything we kind of covered so far? That's kind of the end of the formal stuff that I had. I know it kind of went longer than we expected, but the good questions and good interactions, we had like 40 questions, so that's awesome. Here's my information if you want to kind of reach out to me on all the different handles and formats there. And let's see. And then one thing I want to kind of mention too, again, we do have shadow hours and aid openings, so you can reach out to me directly. I can see where we're possibly a good fit for you, or if there's someone else in the region. And I've got friends that have clinics in most of the Western Washington area, so we can definitely try to connect you with somebody to pick up some shadow hours or an aid position. And then again, just a reminder, just kind of help support the Ukraine refugees. You can go to our page there and just click on the banner, and it kind of gives you some guidelines on how to do that. So we got one more question. Yeah, if you have questions on where to shadow, just email me. We can get that squared away. We work with clinics in the King County area. Yes, we're in King County, so we that's our bread and butter. So from Seattle to on the north end and Snohomish, all the way down to south end of Renton and Olympia, all the way down to Olympia. In fact, we have a clinic in Portland too. So you can reach out to me, and I could probably find someone reasonably close to where you might be living as you return back for the summer home, that sort of thing. As far as when is the next webinar, Richard, that's a great segue. I don't have one scheduled yet at this point. It's probably going to be possibly like in May. So we'd try to do like one a quarter and try to pick a topic. So if you have ideas on topics, email me. Again, you can email me the topic you might want to go into more detail on. We could pull up some mock transcripts. We could kind of do some, kind of transcript work or something like that if you'd like. That's kind of what we're kind of looking at, about once a quarter. Another question real quick. Is it important to have outpatient and inpatient experience? Is inpatient clinic only experience still competitive? Yes. So at this point, any experience is going to be competitive just because people haven't had experience for the last 2.5 years for the most part. So I know this is a distinct advantage, like with our group, Alicia and Kathleen and people that are going to be applying this next year, you know, they'll have a couple thousand hours in the clinic, which is going to be a very unique situation on their application. But yeah, if you can get either of the experiences, great. That's going to be something that will definitely set you apart in the short term. Do I have any connections to clinics in Whatcom County? Yes. So reach out to me and I can connect you with people in the Whatcom, Bellingham, Fairhaven kind of area. Is there an interview if accepted? I'm assuming that means the PT program. So the interview process for the PT programs, if your application is accepted, most of these schools are getting between 350 to 500 applications. So they'll usually take about between 75 and 100 interviews. And then of those people interviewed, it's usually about 40 to 50% get in. So for Montana this last year, for example, I believe it was around 600 applicants. They interviewed 90 and they had 40 spots. So it's highly competitive, but it's the way you keep the profession really strong, for sure. All right. Well, I got to sign off. I'm going to actually have this on our YouTube channel. So if you have someone that you might want to have, that might want to see this, make sure to forward that on to them. You can go there and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we've got a lot of other great stuff on there too, with different physician webinars that we've hosted over the last 10 years. So there's lots of good content on there if you're interested in PT. I hope it was helpful. Thanks for all the comments. I've done a bunch of webinars and this is probably the most interactive one. So I appreciate everyone who's anxious to be part of the field, and look forward to meeting you guys all in person at some point. So thanks so much and have a great night.